Good afternoon. 4:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Joe Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon. We talk about how the Biden administration has decided to abandon actual science for ridiculous nonsense. And then they create government policy using ridiculous nonsense. And Dr. Marjorie, make that Dr. Marjorie Smelkinson. I'll get it out. Dr. Marjorie Smelkinson will be with us at 5 o'clock. We'll talk Montgomery County schools and the reimposition of those stupid mask mandates on some students. And you can chat with us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joining us now is the associate editor over at Hot Air. David Strom is on the phone. David, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Vince, how are you?
I'm doing excellent, and as I often do, I was reading some of your work this week, and I stumbled upon a story about what Google is up to. Google is constantly meddling with its search results in order to distort reality. And this week, you called my attention to a search term, which is, if you just enter it into Google, can men menstruate? And if you type that into Google, the answer is mind-boggling. David, what is going on here?
Yeah, well, you put this into Google. I saw this when James Wood tweeted out a photo of the search engine results, and I didn't believe it. I literally did not believe it, so I tried it myself. And it turns out that Google wants you to believe that the answer is yes, people of all genders menstruate. And, it starts out with a little explainer from TransHub, but you go down the entire page, and it's all about how men can menstruate, including from the National Institutes of Health.
Yes. So I just entered the search term to duplicate the thing that shocked me in the first place. And the top result, so if any person in America writes this into Google, this is the answer that the world's biggest search engine will give them. Can men menstruate? Answer, having a period is not a feminine thing, and people of all genders menstruate, including non-binary people, agender people, and even plenty of men, ! Menstruation doesn't change anything about your gender, it's just a thing that some bodies do. The next result is the United States government, the National Institutes of Health. The headline is, you will find out when the time is right. And it says, most men may not menstruate, but knowledge can facilitate comfort, and comfort can facilitate open discussion. What the hell is going on, David?
Well, I think the word hell belongs to that. I mean, I used to hesitate to use terms like demonic, but it seems like, it is demons who run our world. I mean, we're really living in insane times, and people who I used to laugh at, who would talk about the world going to hell.
Yes.
I now wonder, it's like, were they not paranoid enough? I use Google all the time, and I hate to admit it, but I rely it's not that I believe everything, but I expect that the search results will include, if you poke around, something approximating a diversity of opinions, and hopefully somewhere in there is buried the truth. But really, the whole first page, I mean, you go and I was just shocked. It's all about how menstruation and biology are utterly unrelated.
Yes.
And I went and I read several of these results, and that is the common thread: the utter disconnect between biological functions and biology. Go on.
Totally. And you, because you work in the written medium, because you're online so much, you are probably accustomed to having to use some Google foo to be able to sort through the search results and find the thing that you're looking for. And I know in my case, I'm constantly trying to remember some piece of context from some other news event. And I find myself having to constantly brute force through these search engines, and particularly Google, in order to find the thing that I want. I've got to drill it down 1,000 times because so many of the first few pages of results are filled with left-wing propaganda. Like if you were to search, for instance, about the effectiveness of masks right now on Google, Google is going to serve you result after result trying to convince you that masks are actually great, when the single largest study on the question, the Cochrane study that came out this year, demonstrates that no, there is no evidence that they help at all. And this is the kind of stuff that you have to fight back against in what is obviously a very Orwellian world now.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, there's a little bit of this that is due to who pays Google how much money, but that's not the first 10 or 12. I mean, this has been curated by Google. On controversial topics, they clearly want you to believe certain things, and they serve these things to you in order to make that happen. And, part of the problem is that Google serves as a proxy memory for us. I mean, we're inundated with so much information that we basically outsource a lot of our memory to Google. It's like, well, I'm not going to commit that to memory. I have a sense that it's out there. Now let me go find it. It's what we used to do with bookmarks in our web browsers.
Right.
But now Google is kind of our bookmark, and it's just totally unreliable. The other thing that has happened is Google will often serve as a first thing or on the side a Wikipedia page, and Wikipedia has become extraordinarily political to the point where the founder of Wikipedia is complaining about how it has been taken over by activist groups, so that anything controversial, you are going to get served information from professional propagandists who, since Wikipedia is curated and edited communally.
Yes.
There are people who are paid to go there and serve propaganda at you.
I know, and it's considered, Wikipedia is considered what they call a knowledge base. It's a compilation of all sorts of details and facts and context about all of life. And this is what, we used to think of, the Encyclopedia Britannica in this way, but Wikipedia was supposed to be this big repository of the world's information. But the problem, of course, is what the left discovered especially, is that by controlling what information is delivered, what context is delivered, how to spin this, they can achieve political outcomes. And Wikipedia in particular, one of the reasons it's so pernicious is not just because it's so dominant on Google, which of course it is. It is one of the top results for any search that you do. The other piece is that it serves as the brain for all sorts of tech. So if you ask your smart speaker to tell you about some event, tell me what this proper noun means, you're going to get the Wikipedia interpretation of that event, which was written by left-wing activist forces.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's almost impossible to avoid using them, not just because it's pervasive, but because it is just so extraordinarily useful. I mean, Google, it's very difficult to avoid. It's also the back end for other sorts of search engines that are out there. I continue to rely on it. I just know that I can't trust that the first things that pop up, just as, when you're reading a Wikipedia page, you have to read with a very critical eye.
Yes.
And it's scary because it just gets harder and harder to find things anywhere that isn't spun.
And one of obviously, I know a lot of people listening to this are having the same reaction, and I always do too. I think about this, like you hear something like this and you're like, all right, well, don't use Google, problem solved. Use one of the other search engines, use a Bing, a DuckDuckGo, whatever it is you'd like to use as an alternative. And yes, you can do that on an individual level. But understand here, David, the society-wide impact that a search engine with 90% or more of a dominance in this industry, what kind of impact that has. I mean, how concerned are you about Google's influence as it relates to something like the 2024 election?
Well, I think it had a huge impact on the past few elections. And this is something that goes back to a realization that the Obama people made. In fact, they talked about how they could use tools like Google. And if you go back and you look, a lot of Google executives were deeply tied in with the Obama people. And they've just gotten more and more sophisticated over time. And I don't remember the exact number that they thought it had an impact on, but it was somewhere between 5 and 8 points they thought that they gained by having control over those mechanisms. And it just has to do with shaping the narrative. You know, what happens is it's the same sort of thing that you see in the discussion of, say, Tommy Tuberville versus the Pentagon right now.
Yes.
Everybody is saying Tommy Tuberville is preventing the Pentagon from getting appointments, which is no more true than Joe Biden is preventing the Pentagon from getting those appointments. Joe Biden made a change in policy. He's violating the Hyde Amendment, which is law. And Tuberville is saying, well, no, I don't like that. And if you want to get these appointments through, then you aren't going to get my consent.
Yes.
You're going to have to go to a vote in the Senate.
Yes.
Which is, by the way, the way in which the law was designed to have it happen originally. If you go to the Constitution, all Tuberville is saying, I'm not going to let you break the law, and I'm not going to give my consent to have the Senate break the rules.
Right. Well, the media is involved in a rampant disinformation campaign around this issue because just ask yourself a basic civics question, if you will. If you even have a glancing interest in this story, how does one senator control the entire United States Senate? Tell me that. How does Tommy Tuberville control the entire United States Senate? And the answer is he doesn't. He's just saying, I'm not going to sit there in silence when you ask for, quote, unanimous consent to just ram through every nominee. I'm not allowing it to happen. So if you want to pass each nominee, put them up for a vote. That's all he's saying.
Yep.
And the coverage of this has been completely dishonest. So, you know, this is one of those things. You search for it, you try to get some answers on it, and everybody's acting as Tommy Tuberville, some big villain who's trying to disable the United States military, when he's just a senator who's saying, no, I think we should stop killing children with Pentagon dollars, and as a result, I'm not going to just sign off on nominees en masse.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, they're asking him to do something extraordinary, not the other way around. I mean, unanimous consent, you need that because what they're asking for is, we would like to get around the normal rules of the Senate. The normal rules are we have a vote. And what we're saying here is we're all going to agree we don't even have to have a vote. And he's saying, well, no, I'm not going to agree to that.
Right.
And you know, it's so funny. In fact, I'm writing about this right now. Representative Adam Smith, who's in the House, you know, on the Armed Services Committee, is saying this is anti-democratic. It's like, what, demanding a vote?
I know.
Literally.
And the truth is, you know, I saw a big Washington Post piece this week about how the incoming commandant of the Marine Corps hasn't been confirmed yet. He's only the acting commandant, and this is a big problem. Okay, if it's a big problem, just put him up for a vote. If maybe you can't get every nominee through. I realize it could take months or whatever the timeline is, but maybe a guy like the head of the Marine Corps, you could put his nomination up for a vote today. And they're not doing it. Have you noticed? Democrats aren't doing it. They've decided they'd rather stay in the fight and not get their nominees through.
Oh, yeah. And the Secretary of the Navy said that Tommy Tuberville is on the side of communists because of what he's doing.
What a clown.
It's like, what? I mean, really? I mean, if this is helping communists, why don't you just ask Chuck Schumer to hold the vote?
Exactly. Well, because Chuck Schumer's on the side of the communists, you see. That's the answer. Oh, my gosh. David Strom over at Hot Air. I'm sorry. I wish we had more time. We have to, because every time we chat, we have so much to talk about. David Strom, thank you very much, and keep up the great work. All right, the breaking news now this hour, prosecutors in the United States and the United States government are seeking an indictment of Hunter Biden by September 29th. That's the claim here. This is a new filing today sent by David Weiss's office in the U.S. District Court for the District of Delaware, indicating that the government does intend to seek the return of an indictment in this case before Friday, September 29th. So they say the government does not believe any action by the court is necessary at this time. That would be on the plea agreement, because the judge, if you'll recall, had said, wait a second, you're giving Hunter Biden the biggest sweetheart deal anybody's ever seen. Can you please explain this to me? I can't make a decision about this just yet. I'm going to need more explanation here. And so this is the explanation. This is the Justice Department kind of walking back the original plea deal and saying, okay, we're going to have an indictment returned by September 29th. So we'll see what happens in this case. I don't trust any of these people. I just do not trust them. This Democrat U.S. attorney, they all say Trump appointed, the guy was put in place by the Democrat senators in Delaware. David Weiss was. It is just, the whole thing stinks to high heaven. And you've got people on his team who were alerting Hunter Biden's team ahead of time to investigative steps, and then telling the actual investigators, the IRS whistleblowers, that they couldn't chase down leads, including when dad was involved or the big guy. What a complete scam. Congress now this week demanding more and more answers on the sweetheart deal. Clearly, people within the Justice Department now scrambling to cover up the corruption, make it seem like everything's on the up and up. The update this afternoon, they say an indictment to be returned by the 29th of this month. We'll bring you updates as we have them. Coming up, Joe Simonson joins us from the Free Beacon. He's got some news for us on the anti-science behaviors of the Biden administration. Here's a hint. It involves rain dances. That's ahead. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Coming up, 5 o'clock, Dr. Marjorie Smelkinson. Did I say doctory again? I'm having a lot of trouble with this name today. Dr. Marjorie Smelkinson will be with us today. She's got a great name. She's also got a great job. She's an expert on infectious diseases. She's got a couple of kids in the Montgomery County school system. And I'd like to get her reaction to at least one Montgomery County school saying, hey, some of these students have to mask up again. Is that going to help anybody? We'll ask her. And we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. From research to rain dances, from probabilities to peyote, something is going on here. The Biden administration has decided that they are abandoning traditional, quote, Western science in favor of indigenous knowledge. What does that mean? Joe Simonson is the senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon. He's been digging into this very question and has an excellent report on it today. Joe, good afternoon to you.
Vince, how are we?
I'm doing okay, but I'm very concerned about my government again. You say that they have decided to swap science for indigenous knowledge. Tell us how this has happened.
Sure. So I'm sure your listeners will remember Biden campaigned on and ultimately won on the message of following the science. And we see that on blue lawns in Democratic suburbs across the country. We see little signs that say, in this house, we trust the science and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things Biden did shortly when he came into office was say, I'm going to make the Office of Science and Technology Policy a cabinet-level agency, like the State Department. The problem is, less than a year after that agency got that promotion to the cabinet, they put out a memorandum. And this memorandum did not really make much of a splash. They didn't go on TV and primetime and say, oh, we're making some changes.
Right.
But the memorandum still went out, and in that memorandum, it said, indigenous knowledge or native science must be considered when making policy or regulations in more than 24 agencies. What is indigenous science or indigenous knowledge? Well, there's no real definition of it, but essentially it's folk wisdom passed down by Native Americans, which means if some tribal elder says, oh, you think there's an endangered bird in this area. Well, actually, and we hunt that bird. But actually, we have a different way of measuring a population of a certain species, and that's passed down through generations. So we actually think there's a lot more of that bird in this area.
So we govern with a vibe rather than data.
It's totally vibe based, and even more than that, in the same paragraph that the White House is talking about a commitment to science, the next sentence will say, therefore, we have to incorporate spiritual knowledge from Native people.
Okay. All right. So in your piece today, you include a number of links to government webinars. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if the Biden administration takes these down now because you called attention to them. But luckily, we were able to capture some of the audio from them. And these are webinars. These are Zoom calls where you have government officials sitting around with various Native tribal leaders talking about the replacement of what they call Western traditional science with indigenous knowledge. And for instance, here's an example of someone called Damaris Tevuk, who's the lead researcher for the Native Neighborhood Community Study, saying that traditional knowledge is going to be different for every single family. Listen to this.
I think the reason why traditional knowledge is listed as abstract here is because traditional knowledge is very contextual, and I will repeat that traditional knowledge, it's going to vary even among different families within the same tribe in the same area. They're going to have different information.
Wait, so how can we rely on it if it's going to be different among families who live in the same exact area?
Well, that's actually the $1 million question, Vince. That's actually the $500 million question, because one of the things, the consequences of this memorandum that the White House issued 2 years ago, is that indigenous knowledge and native science has to be used in what are called highly influential scientific reports. Now, that's a lot of government jargon for something that essentially means if the Department of Commerce puts out a report or a study that says this certain type of fishing or whatever, forestry method, it really should be outlawed. It's bad for the environment or whatever. If it has more than $500 million of economic consequences, the government gets to use native science to reach those conclusions. So in other words, if a native tribesman says, oh, yeah, my ancestors told me that this tree that actually has no real meaning, significance in normal science cannot be cut down, and it screws up the logging industry, that has the same weight as like a lab study that the EPA traditionally does.
Okay, so this is all like insane, obviously. There's another piece here I want to share. A woman called Winona Wilson. She's an EPA official. She says in this webinar that indigenous people have secret knowledge that they may or may not be willing to share. And remember, when it comes to the government, if they make a decision, all of the decision making is subject to FOIA. Like you're actually able as an American citizen to find out what went into this decision. You can normally get the paperwork, but it's not true with indigenous knowledge. Take a listen to this.
We want to be able to work with indigenous knowledge appropriately when indigenous nations and people make the decision to share it. We understand that integrating indigenous knowledge and worldview into federal decision-making will result in better decision-making. At the same time, we understand indigenous nations and peoples will decide what is appropriate to share with the federal
and what is not. Here, Joe Simonson, what if there's some indigenous knowledge that could save us from the looming climate catastrophe that they're refusing to share with us? What do we do?
Well, that's a great question. You know, the actual more disturbing implication of that soundbite you just played is actually the opposite, right? So if the EPA puts out some study that has all these regulatory consequences, or it doesn't have the EPA, I mean, there are more than 24 government agencies now are affected by this. If they make some decision that says, we spoke to various tribes and elders and whatever, we decided this is the best course of action. What the tribes and what the Biden administration says they'll work with the tribes or individual Native Americans on is saying, we won't let the public know what that knowledge was.
Right. Like in other words, like the public won't be made aware of what the rationale was for this dramatic decision that upends an entire economy.
Correct. That's exactly what the tribes are saying. That's exactly what the Biden administration is not along the way with.
Oh, man. By the way, your phone's breaking up a little bit here. I don't know what might be inducing that. There are clearly forces who would like to stop you from reporting this.
Sorry about that.
Let me play some more audio, though, while your reception hopefully recovers. This is Gretchen Goldman. She's an assistant director for environmental science, engineering policy, and justice at the White House Office of Science and Technology. The longer the title, the more ridiculous the person. Here's Gretchen Goldman starting her remarks at this webinar with a, quote, land acknowledgement. This is a lefty ritual.
I'm excited to join you all today. My name is Gretchen Goldman. I'm the Assistant Director for Environmental Science, Engineering, Policy, and Justice at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So first, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm giving this presentation from Washington, D.C., which is the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway peoples, who are the original stewards of this land and who continue to live in this region.
Gretchen Goldman goes on to say this White House, that is the Joe Biden White House, has decided that we will supplant Western science with indigenous traditional ecological knowledge.
So the Biden-Harris administration hosted its first White House Tribal Nations Summit last November. And among several announcements and discussion topics that were included in that event, President Biden announced the White House initiative to elevate the role of indigenous traditional ecological knowledge in federal decision-making.
Yeah, so that's how we got here, Joe.
Yeah, sorry about that, Vince. Can you hear me better now?
I hear you great now. Go for it.
Yeah, the spirits are unhappy with me, I guess. But you joke, and we joke about the spirits, but I really can't emphasize this enough, is that the position of the federal government, the position of the United States government, is that Native Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people, whatever, basically we get to use their religious beliefs when crafting policy going forward.
Yeah.
And that affects FEMA, that affects the State Department, that affects all sorts of agencies. And the cherry on top, again, just to reiterate, is you don't get to know what that knowledge is.
There was, the fire that just burned in Lahaina, western Maui, burned down an entire town, left a lot of people dead, a lot of people missing. I noticed, it's in your coverage today as well, Joe Simonson, but I noticed during this saga that one of the things that was raised is that water, the precious resource of water that's, you typically want to use it for a fire, may have been prevented from getting to Lahaina by a man who believed that water had spiritual principles, that we needed to conserve it, that maybe we shouldn't rush it over to Lahaina. Are there real world consequences to this type of idiocy?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The case is still out on what happened in Hawaii. Certainly there's been a lot of reporting that suggests there were, well, let's just say non-scientific decisions made that could have potentially averted disaster there. But where this has really caught on and where it's really from is our neighbors up north in Canada. Now, in Canada, they have a much more so using Indigenous knowledge here is very new. Up in Canada, it's been going on for almost 2 decades now, if not a little bit longer. And the problem is that in Canada, it actually works counterintuitive. It actually hurts environmental regulation. I'm not talking about like climate change stuff, but I'm saying if like polar bear hunting is an issue in Canada. Everyone loves polar bears. They're very beautiful animals. The problem is that the native tribes very up north in the middle of nowhere in Canada also hunt polar bears. They sell their pelts to an exotic exchanges, and they go for a lot of money, but they're killing all the polar bears, so it's a problem. And so for a long time, the Canadian government would work with these tribes and say, hey guys, like, you're killing polar bears. And what the tribes would say, and this goes to something I said earlier, is say, no. This Western way of measuring bear population is totally off. You don't understand. We see bears all the time.
Right.
And for about 20 years, they did not regulate the polar bear trade.
Right. So in other words, this has very real world consequences. Although, yeah, as you're saying all this, I did think, though, speaking of Western medicine, I mean, Anthony Fauci was basically in charge of our entire COVID response. I think I would have rather have had a tribal medicine man in charge than Anthony Fauci. So there are some trade-offs here, Joe Simonson.
You know, Vince, I actually tried reaching out to Fauci for this story. I would have loved his perspective, but I never heard back.
He doesn't even want to defend Western medicine. How about that? Oh, Joe Simonson, senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you for digging into this. I'm sorry it's happening. I'm glad I know about it. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Vince.
It's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. In the piece, it's a great piece. He quotes experts saying this is extremely dangerous. The headline: inside the Biden administration's push to swap science for indigenous knowledge. I just turned to Corey and I said, have I ever told you the story when I had a medicine man work on me? He looked at me. He's like, what? No. Yeah, it was many now decades ago. I was a college student. I was on a trip in Peru. We were up in the Peruvian Andes. We were about as far from civilization as you could get. And we were in a village up there visiting. It was a college trip. We were the business club at the time, kind of seeing the world. And it was a very, colorful community with all sorts of traditional dress. The people speak a language called Quechua, is the name of the language. And as a result, unless you can find a Quechua to English translator, what you typically need is two translators to handle all of the communications. So it's Quechua to Spanish, then Spanish to English. So we'd have two translators with us for all of our conversations with the people who spoke Quechua. And at one point, as I'm walking around in this village, tens of thousands of feet up in the Peruvian Andes, I twisted my ankle on some rock, because of course everywhere are rocks, and I have a bad ankle on my right. So this one twists out, and the whole thing, it swells up in a second. It is just bad. I know I sprained it. I heard it crack when I twisted. It was just a bad one. And what are our options? What do I do? We don't have any medicine available. We don't have any painkillers available. It wasn't exactly the most well thought out, well prepared for trip. And so one of the villagers there was like, well, we do have the medicine man. And I was like, hey, what the hell? It'll make a good story. Maybe I'll tell it decades from now on a radio program. So I had a buddy who was with me help get me up the side of this mountain to go see a medicine man is at a much higher position. I guess you got to take the pilgrimage to the medicine man. And I have no idea what I'm in for. I don't know what to expect. I swear to you, this is all totally real. And I get in there and I'm surrounded by the other college students who were with me because they want to see this. Now it's like a big, hilarious episode that they all have to, they get to experience. What is it like? A medicine man working on somebody. And the guy gives me, he's got all the traditional dress, very colorful on, gives me a drink of some substance, and I don't ask any questions. I'm in college. Come on, who cares? So I take the drink, and it tastes just bizarre. It tastes like, some weird concoction. I don't know what it is. I don't ask any questions. Just so you know, it didn't do anything. It didn't help me in any way. And then he literally dips his hand into, I swear to you, a vat of clear liquid of like, almost a gelatinous substance that has a coiled up snake at the bottom of it. It's inside of this jar, and takes the stuff and then starts rubbing it into my ankle and pretty aggressively rubbing into the spot on my ankle that I was saying that's where the pain is. You could see it because it's swollen up. And he claimed by the end of it, by way of our two translators, that he had done something meaningful to my ankle. The meaningful thing that he had done, as far as I was aware, was he just hurt it more. And By the end of it, they once again, I didn't walk down the mountain miraculously. Indigenous knowledge did not actually change my fortune. In fact, it may have made things worse. They had to help carry me back down the way from which I came. So anyway, as far as Yelp reviews go, I'm not going with 5 stars. I mean, it was amusing at the time. It was a fascinating adventure. Pretty sure my ankle's still screwed up as a result of it. Literal snake oil, and I don't know what I drank. I have no idea. It probably made me who I am today. Coming up, Dr. Marjorie Smelkinson will be with us, an actual scientist, an actual doctor, to talk about the religious nonsense that they're using inside of Montgomery County schools as they reimpose the talisman, the mask that will keep COVID away.